Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
When you go in to get your driver's license, sometimes they make you take a vision test to see if you need to have corrective lenses while you drive. And sometimes they actually ask questions. It depends on the state, but sometimes they'll ask you questions about your medical condition. Do you have any medical conditions that might keep you from driving safely? And that's something they ask a lot of people, and I'm not sure how many people have got medical conditions that affect them and how many of those people actually say, yes, that's me, I got a problem, or skip that. But here's a story out of Maryland, and Madcap sent this to me, and this is an interesting story. Little-known Maryland law requires people with sleep apnea to report diagnosis to driving authorities. Sleep apnea. And all I know about sleep apnea is what I've seen on TV with the ads, but Susan Hogan, Katie Leslie, and Steve Jones all wrote this. A Maryland man said he knew going for a sleep study could lead to a sleep apnea diagnosis, but he had no idea it could also put him on the Motor Vehicle Administration's radar. And it might not be you want to be on their radar. The man is a dentist in Rockville, diagnosed with mild sleep apnea last year. A few months later, he received a letter from the MVA requesting additional information about his diagnosis in order to determine your fitness to drive. And the interesting thing is he doesn't know how they found out. How many people knew about his diagnosis and how did information get to the state? The letter noted failure to return the required forms could result in the suspension of his license. And one of the forms would be a report from his physician on his diagnosis. He said it was a big jump from a sleep study to a letter stating my license was about to get revoked, potentially. He is among an estimated 30 million Americans with sleep apnea, a condition in which one's breathing stops throughout the night, leaving people more prone to daytime fatigue and drowsiness. Left untreated, sleep apnea has been linked to other medical conditions such as cardiovascular disease. Now, the man here said he isn't clear how the state learned about his condition, and more importantly, he said he was previously unaware that there's actually a law in Maryland requiring people to report their sleep apnea diagnosis to the state driving authorities. And I suspect right now there's a lot of other people going, what? I didn't know that either. I've never heard of this. I don't want to downplay sleep apnea as a condition and prevent people from actually getting sleep studies, but they should be aware that the state requires you to voluntarily submit that information if you are so diagnosed with sleep apnea. Maryland law lists sleep apnea among more than a dozen potentially serious medical conditions that can impact a person's ability to drive safely. Along with that would be diabetes, epilepsy, or strokes. According to the law, a driver must report the problem when it's diagnosed or when he or she is applying for a driver's license or renewing an existing driver's license. So theoretically, if you get diagnosed with diabetes in that state, you've got to contact the licensing authorities and let them know that. So turns out that driving laws across the country vary from state to state, and that is absolutely true. But there are other states that have similar statutes with respect to sleep apnea, including Florida, New Jersey, Maine, and Texas. Virginia law requires its DMV to ask drivers applying for or renewing a license if they have a medical condition that could prevent them from driving safely, but doesn't specify sleep apnea. So that's always going to be the situation. Someone comes in, they see that thing, go, no, I'm fine. Later, somebody goes, but you have sleep apnea. Well, I didn't think that would actually affect my ability to drive safely. And again, some states have specifically said, yes, it is, you need to report it. And others say, well, you just need to report whatever it could be. DC code doesn't specifically address sleep apnea either, but asks drivers with a condition that can impair your ability to drive safely to have their doctor submit a medical report. But despite how common the disorder is, less common is how familiar sleep apnea sufferers may be with reporting requirements. The executive director of the American Sleep Apnea Association said, I've never heard of this requirement. I've never heard of this. He said, while commercial truck drivers are subject to medical examinations that may take sleep apnea into account, he was unaware of any state requiring regular motorists to voluntarily report their diagnosis. So apparently he knows about it now. He said he now plans to poll his organization's members to gauge how many have encountered similar requirements across the country. We're definitely going to do a campaign trying to figure out what people know. Now, the medical director for Howard University's Sleep Disorders Center said the law is based on reasonable science, as untreated moderate to severe sleep apnea can have effects on safe driving. He cited studies that show some forms of sleep apnea can cause impairment that mimics alcohol-impaired driving. So if one has gone 18 hours without sleep, the impairment is starting to reach a comparable level to what intoxication does, and the impairment is very real. And I have no doubt about that, but it sounds like it's something across an entire spectrum, so that there's people with none of it, there's people who've got it as bad as you can get it, there's people all over in between. The question is, where in the middle of that spectrum is it? Or is it over here? Or is it over here? And so if your doctor says, well, you've got moderate sleep apnea, does that affect your ability to drive? What about mild sleep apnea? And so on. So he stressed that physicians like him aren't asked to report their patients to motor vehicle administrations, though he said he tells his patients about any potential self-reporting requirements. He also said he wouldn't want potential sleep apnea sufferers to delay seeking medical care to avoid hassling with the motor vehicle people. Severe forms of sleep apnea, he said, can not only impact their ability to drive, but cause a host of other medical problems. Hopefully people take the perspective that if I have a condition that makes me a less safe driver, wouldn't it be better that I get it identified, get it treated, and become a safe driver? A spokesperson added that customers applying for or renewing a license are asked whether they've been diagnosed with any physical or mental disabilities other than vision, which may affect your driving. Marking yes, and this is in Maryland, to that question prompts a medical review. A spokesperson again from Maryland says, once a medical condition is reported to MDOT/MVA, a suspension may occur if a customer does not complete and return the medical review forms, or if the medical advisory board's review of information provided by the customer and their physician indicates that a suspension is necessary. Now, what happened in the man's case that I'm talking about at the beginning of the story appears to be very rare. Through an open records request, journalists learned he's among only 1,300 people whose sleep apnea diagnoses have led to medical reviews by the Maryland MVA. They also asked the MVA how many Maryland drivers have had their license suspended in connection with a sleep apnea diagnosis, but the state said they don't know. They don't track that data. So in the end, this guy was able to keep his license after submitting the required forms. He noted the process was even more stressful because the state initially asked for sleep data from his BiPAP machine, but he couldn't immediately obtain the breathing machine due to a global shortage because of COVID. He said he still has questions about what prompted the ordeal. He doesn't know. Everybody I talked to, nobody's heard of anything like this, he said. I'm sure they want to keep the road safe, so he understands that. But the bigger problem is that this law is in the books, and most people have never heard of it. I had not heard of it with respect to sleep apnea. And more importantly, he goes to see his doctor. He gets diagnosed with something, and he comes home and finds a letter a little while down the road in his mailbox from the state saying, we understand you've got this disease. Fill out these forms. And he says, I don't know how they found that out. I didn't tell him. That's an interesting point also. So, and they mention, of course, that the vision is often separated out because most people's vision can be treated with corrective lenses, i.e. contact lenses or glasses. And so that's another thing. But with respect to a disease or a condition that would make it difficult for you to drive and actually impair your ability, I completely understand. I completely understand the state looking at that. But my concern is that there's a law on the books that most people don't know exists, and a bigger problem with a particular thing such as sleep apnea, that there's going to be a range. And where in this range does it become dangerous? And can your doctor actually call it with that precision and say, yes, you're right under the range, you're good, or you're right over the range, you're no good? And again, I'm not a doctor specializing in sleep apnea, but it sounds like from the experts they interviewed here that Not a lot of people can say for sure where that bright line is. So Madcap sent this to me. Thank you very much. Little known Maryland law requires people with sleep apnea to report diagnosis to the driving authorities. And yep, that is, in fact, little known. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Every closed eye is not sleeping, and every open eye is not seeing.